My wife and I had been married for 20 years. I genuinely thought that I'd found the person that I was going to spend the rest of my life with, and I was very thankful for her. We met through mutual friends and hit it off. My buddy kept telling me that he knew someone that I would get along with, and he was right. When we got together, it wasn't an official date by any means. We were just hanging out at my friend's house playing some board games. My wife was being weirdly competitive, and I thought it was adorable, so I ended up asking her out after. We had a lot in common, and we really enjoyed spending time together. Marriage was a no-brainer for us when it came time for it. We both wanted a family. We wanted that classic white picket fence life. We were young when we got married because we wanted to start a family. My wife was adamant about not wanting to be an old grandmother, which I thought was kind of funny. She wanted to be able to keep up with children and grandkids. Over the years, we had 4 children. About 10 years ago, we thought that we wanted to have one more child and we were going to call it there. The 4 kids that we had were amazing, but my wife really wanted a daughter. It was a stressful time in our marriage because getting pregnant was difficult. It was all the more stressful when my wife miscarried about 3 months after we found out she was pregnant. The entire family was broken about it. Even though we were upset, we all stayed together and we honored the unborn child that my wife lost. My wife took it harder than anybody else in the family, but no matter what she said or did, I was there to help her. The reason I mention this is because when the shoe was put on the other foot, my wife was completely absent from me. Last year, I was in a really bad car accident, and I broke many bones in my body. All of the doctors said that it was a miracle that I survived. Even though I survived, there are some things in my life that will never be the same. I'm paralyzed from the waist down thanks to spinal damage that I took. Before I recovered some, I had 2 broken arms and a broken neck. I could hardly do anything on my own. After the accident, I needed the support of my family to help me function. I could think and feel and talk, but I couldn't even go to the bathroom by myself. This is where the vows in sickness and in health really come into play. When my wife was struggling after the miscarriage, I was there every step of the way. When I literally couldn't feed myself, she would stay away from me and leave my children to take care of me. It took quite some time and a fair amount of rehabilitation for me to get to where I am today. I'm going to be wheelchair bound for the rest of my life, which is something that I've been getting used to. Once I was able to get out of bed and roam around the house more, I started to notice some things were off. Aside from her avoiding me like the plague, she was very secretive about a lot of things going on in her life. For example, when she would go grocery shopping, she would be gone for 4 hours. When she got a phone call, she would answer it secretly and excuse herself to take the call outside. The entire time we had been married, she never did anything like that. On top of that, she had been getting very into her appearance. She wore makeup everywhere she went. She made sure her hair was nice, and she dressed up. I didn't understand why a 20-minute trip to the grocery store required all of that, but I didn't say anything. While I was bedridden, I had been stewing over some of my feelings for her not taking care of me. I felt like she abandoned me, and whenever I tried to talk to her about it, she would just shut down. So, eventually, I stopped. One night, she was supposed to be at her sister's house, helping her pack up some old things from their parents. When she left, she told me she was only going to be gone for a few hours, and that she would be back in time to cook dinner. Our kids weren't really cooking at the time. Our oldest was 17. And he had a job that he worked at most nights, and the others were less than 13. None of them had really developed many cooking skills in their brief time on Earth. I couldn't cook in my condition, so we kind of relied on my wife to be there to cook for us. Time went on, and my wife didn't show up. I started to get worried, so I called her, and she didn't answer her phone. I called her sister and asked her if she was there, and she told me that she was. She mentioned that my wife had been drinking some wine, and she ended up passing out on the couch. I was annoyed at the idea that she would just sleep over at our sister's house without saying anything, but I was glad she was safe. We ended up having to splurge and order dinner that night, which we had really been trying to avoid because we were on a tight budget since I couldn't work. The following day, my wife came back home, and she looked like a mess. I made some jokes about how she must have had a rough night drinking, but I didn't want any issues if she was feeling ill or hungover. It wasn't even that big of a deal. At least it wasn't until it happened again. The second time it happened, it was a very similar situation. I was understandably annoyed and frustrated that my wife had let something like that happen twice. I could understand every now and then spending the night at her sister's and sharing a few glasses, but getting belligerently drunk to the point that you pass out is an entirely different story. It felt immature and negligent to me. With everything that had been going on, I really started to suspect that my wife was up to something else. I had no reason not to believe she wasn't at her sister's house when she told me, but I thought more about the extra hours when she was supposed to be grocery shopping or the superfluous errands she would run. If she was having some kind of affair, she would have had ample time to do so. One day, when she went to the grocery store, I swapped phones with her. We had the same phone, and my wife, for some strange reason, refused to put a case on hers. So while she had her back turned, I took the case off of my phone and put it on hers, so she'd grab my phone and think that it was her own. Everything went according to plan, and she walked out of the house with my phone in her purse. When I knew she was far enough away, I unlocked her phone and started looking through it. I found way more dirt on my wife than I ever thought I would have. I was honestly in disbelief when I saw how many other men she was talking to. She had downloaded a dating app on her phone and was talking to several men on that. In her bio and a lot of the messages, she mentioned being recently divorced and just looking for a good time. She gave her number out to a lot of different guys, and they exchanged pictures and flirty messages. It was clear from the context and the messages that she had met up with several of them. What struck me most of all in the messages was seeing one from somebody that I knew from work. I was humiliated to see that they had been together. He messaged my wife when he saw her and said he was sorry that we had been divorced, mentioning that he didn't know anything about it. My wife lied and told him that it was very recent, and they were trying to keep it quiet. They both then confessed that they had been attracted to each other for quite some time. The guy from my work was married to another one of my coworkers. Everyone in the office was married, so seeing him on a dating app was a major red flag. The most heartbreaking realization of all of it was seeing that she had started messaging these guys about a week after my accident. She hadn't been there for me at all to help me recover. Instead, she was going around behind my back and screwing around with all these other guys. I was irate when I found all of this out. She had completely forsaken our wedding vows and treated me as if I were gum on the bottom of her shoe. I gave 20 years of my life to her, dedicating myself to her entirely, and she stabbed me in the back. I gathered as much evidence from her phone as I could, and I emailed it all to myself so I could send it to the divorce attorney that I planned on contacting. I'm divorcing her, but I wanted to get back at her. I wanted to show the world who she really was. She wasn't the loving and doting soccer mom like everyone thought she was, and I wanted to rip that mask off to reveal her true colors. I put her phone back where I originally found it so I could pretend like I didn't know anything. She came back from the grocery store about 5 hours after she left with only a few bags of groceries. I actually had a birthday coming up. Before I found any of this out, I had already been telling my wife that I wanted to have some kind of party so I could get everyone that I knew together and spend time with them. It had been quite some time since I'd seen many of our friends and my coworkers, so I thought it would be a nice opportunity to do so. My intentions for the party had completely changed after I found out she was cheating. I still threw the party, and I made sure she invited everybody from my office as well as all our family members and friends. The day of the party came, and we were having a great time. Everybody was asking me how I was doing, telling my wife they were so happy that I was okay, and she was agreeing with them with a big smile on her face. I even heard her comment on how difficult the journey to my recovery had been for all of us. That was what really set me off. Hearing her take credit for my recovery when she had absolutely nothing to do with it was infuriating. I immediately turned around and called her out for it. A lot of people in the crowd were obviously a little concerned about our argument, but they weren't saying anything. They were all just listening curiously. When I noticed everybody was listening, I turned right around and explained to them that my wife wasn't there for me. Instead, she was out sleeping with a bunch of random guys and my coworker, who I pointed to when I said it. His wife looked at him very confused, then I elaborated more. I said a few quotes that were in their messages to each other, and my wife was clearly about to explode on me. My wife ended the party early and sent everyone home. The wife of my coworker poured a drink in her hair before leaving. She called her a flurry of names and walked out telling her husband that she wanted him out of the house. I told my wife that I didn't want to talk about anything. I had all the evidence that I needed and I was already in contact with a divorce attorney. Everything in the house was under my name, and I wanted her out as soon as possible. I told her that she would be getting nothing from me, to which she replied that she was entitled to half, if not more. When the divorce battle came around, I smugly walked away with everything I owned. Because she cheated, she wasn't entitled to a dime of my money. Child custody was easy because our kids hated her for everything she did. That was never my intent. But they saw a woman who cheated on their badly injured father and didn't want anything to do with her. I couldn't blame them, though I do hope they will come around eventually to forgive her so they can have a relationship with her. As it turns out, her sister was covering for her all the nights that she said she passed out at her house. Her sister actually encouraged her to seek extramarital sex. Apparently, my wife had been complaining about how she didn't think we would be able to sleep together anymore, so her sister gave her some information about dating apps. OP, first of all, I'm really happy to hear that you are making a recovery from your accident. It sounds like you still have quite a road ahead of you, but your kids are there to support you and help you. It's honestly heartbreaking to hear how absent your wife was during your recovery. She was supposed to be someone who you could count on to help take care of you in events like this, and she was MIA. It's disheartening to hear that your sister-in-law encouraged your wife to cheat on you so soon after your accident. Not that it's ever okay, but just a couple of months after you narrowly escaped death is despicable. I'm glad that you won in the divorce and that your children are on your side with everything. They probably saw all the same things that you did. Your children shouldn't have been forced to be your main caretakers. They are just children. Your wife was extremely selfish in her actions, and it really seems like she deserves everything that comes back to her about this. I wish you well, and I wish your children well. I hope you're able to move on from this and recover from your injuries quickly. Now, let's move on to our next story. My wife and I had been married for 25 years before we got divorced. We had our struggles, but we always managed to work through everything and come out stronger. Neither of us wanted children when we got together. We were very career focused, and we wanted to ensure that we could live happy lives with a moderate amount of wealth. About 5 years into our marriage, my wife had a change of heart. After careful consideration, we decided that we would try to have a child. It turned out to be the best decision of our lives. We had a baby girl. For the sake of this, let's call her Emily. She has been the light of our lives ever since she was born. Admittedly, we might have spoiled her quite a bit. She was an only child, and we wanted to make sure she had everything she wanted. That being said, she still had responsibilities that she had to take care of before she got things. When Emily moved away for college, it was one of the hardest days of our lives. Everything we had been doing for the past 18 years was dedicated to our daughter, and she was gone. We knew that it was just a step forward for her, and that it wasn't the end of our relationship, but still, it was a bit of a struggle. After her first year in college, we had gotten used to her absence. We still missed her, and we valued the time we had when she would come home for breaks. But it was almost like we had the life we originally envisioned when we got married. We were traveling and going and doing things that we couldn't have done with a child. During Emily's sophomore year of college, she ended up studying abroad for a semester. She studied in Italy where she met her boyfriend. Let's call him Joey. She had many boyfriends growing up, but none were quite like Joey. She adored him. The way she talked about him made it seem like she knew he was the one for her. My wife and I were both excited to meet him because he seemed to be an all-around great guy. Because he lived in Italy, getting together for dinner was a little difficult, but the summer after her sophomore year, we invited him along to our lake house for our vacation. We had bought the lake house 5 years prior and had gone every summer since then. Joey was still a student, so we paid for his plane ticket to come and see us because we just really wanted to meet him. My wife and I instantly liked him. He was charming and handsome with a good head on his shoulders. He was studying to be a surgeon and was apparently at the top of his class. At the end of dinner, I was practically begging my daughter to marry him. Apparently, my wife also really liked him, just in a very different way than I did. I noticed during dinner that she would blush whenever he complimented her. At first, I thought it was kind of funny. He was a cute younger guy who was telling my wife that she looked good for her age, and my wife was falling for his charm. Throughout the rest of the week, the two of them developed an interesting relationship. It was very flirty. It made me uncomfortable, but I didn't want to draw too much attention to it for my daughter's sake. I mentioned it to my wife, and she told me that my concerns were nonsense. He was just Italian, and Italian men were like that. Maybe I was being naive, but I believed her. It was the fourth day of our vacation when I ended up coming down with quite a bad migraine. I would get them from time to time over the years, and whenever I felt one coming on, the best thing for me to do was just to sleep. All the time in the sun was really not helping keep it away, so I took off early from an outing to go home. They don't usually take too long to clear up as long as I can get some decent rest. I drew back the curtains in my room and put a pillow over my head after popping a few Excedrin, and I fell asleep instantly. I woke up hours later, completely unaware of what time it even was. Thankfully, my migraine was gone. Even though my migraine was gone, I was starving. I looked at the clock and saw that it was a little after midnight. So I tiptoed through the house to make a sandwich in the kitchen. My wife wasn't in bed when I left, though I figured she might have just passed out in a guest room or on the couch to avoid waking me. I wasn't too concerned with that. I walked by my daughter's room and saw that she was in bed asleep. Her boyfriend wasn't there with her, and again didn't think much of it. I got to the kitchen and started trying to open the cabinets and fridge as quietly as possible to avoid waking up my daughter. Then I heard the giggling. I froze to get a better idea of what I was hearing. From the porch outside, I could hear Joey saying something in Italian and my wife giggling at it. At first, I thought it was just the harmless banter she had told me so much about. Then I heard a little bit of moaning. Right away, I walked over to the window and peeped through it. My wife was straddling Joey and he was kissing her neck. She had been wearing one of those long dresses, and it was raised up above her hips, just enough for me to see that they were indeed having sex. My wife was having sex with my daughter's boyfriend on the front porch of our lake house while my daughter and I were both upstairs asleep. I was completely frozen in place as I tried to figure out what to do. My wife was cheating on me. With my daughter's boyfriend, I was at a complete loss for words. They continued what they were doing, and all I could think to do was pull out my phone and take a video of it for evidence against them. They were talking to each other while they were having sex and mentioning how they wanted to go inside to the basement again. That made me think that maybe it wasn't the first time they were together. I just went back upstairs and tried to think about what to do. If it wasn't the first time they were together, it couldn't have been some drunk mistake. Even then, it's unacceptable, but maybe it would be easier to digest if I knew they weren't in their right minds. To do it twice was extremely intentional. As I was lying in bed, I heard them make their way into the basement. There was a little bit of ruckus as they walked through the darkness and made their way to the door. It almost sounded like an intruder, which is when I had the bright idea to catch them in the act. After hearing them, I jumped out of bed and grabbed the baseball bat that I had behind my door. I went into my daughter's room and quickly woke her up, telling her that I heard something in the basement. I told my daughter to stay where she was, but knowing her that wasn't going to happen. I tiptoed down the stairs, pretending like I thought I was going to have to use my bat to fight off some criminal. My daughter was just steps behind me, peeking out to see what was going on. We made it to the basement and all of the lights were on. We heard Joey and my wife having sex before we saw anything. They were hardly making an effort to be quiet. It was almost like they wanted to be caught. When we saw them, both my daughter and I screamed at them. They were completely naked, and there was absolutely no denying what was happening. Right away, I regretted waking up my daughter for that. I should have been the one to catch them, and I should have shielded her from what she saw, but I wasn't thinking. They tried to cover themselves and explain what was happening, but it was just senseless rambling. My daughter stormed away, and I followed behind her. We both started packing our things to go back home. We didn't care what happened with either Joey or my wife. We just needed to get out of the house. My wife tried to tell me that it was a mistake, but I just told her to leave me alone. I had a lot I needed to figure out, and I didn't need her in my ear trying to talk me out of my decision. My daughter and I drove back home in silence, both terribly upset about what we saw. When I got home, I started looking into divorce attorneys. My daughter helped me look. After a few hours in the morning, we sat down together and had a conversation. She was mortified by what she saw, and she didn't think she was ever going to be able to look at her mother again, much less have a relationship with her. What I didn't know was that my daughter had spoken to my wife just a couple of days before about how much she loved Joey. They had been talking about marriage, and she thought it was a possibility for her. They had been considering marriage after she graduated. I was heartbroken for my daughter and completely furious with my wife. Cheating is never